Hello, everybody. For those of you who were watching, I recently played a SuperStar Showdown match against the infamous Isildur, Victor Blom on PokerStars. It was a 2-week thing, and we played 54 hands where the pots were 20,000 or bigger. And I thought it might be a good exercise to, aside from just myself and learning, to go over some of the mistakes that I made, as well as some of the things that maybe I did right. Hopefully we'll find a few hands where I did. Okay, so this is early on in the match. The blinds are 1500, and I'll set this up a little bit because in match number 1, I'd been practicing a strategy that I thought would work well against a player like Isildur, which was to min-raise buttons. It worked for Isaac Haxton in match 1, and also I was betting, this is something I did a little differently, I was betting 50% of pot on flop, so really playing very small ball poker against Isildur in position. Now, in the second session, I made some major adjustments, which you'll see. I'll give you a little hint. I was 3xing, and I was also on flops. Instead of betting 50% of pot, I was betting 80% of pot. So I really changed my strategy pretty drastically. And like I said, I think somewhere in the middle is probably the best approach, but I definitely wanted to go with something different in the second round since round 1 went about as bad as it could go. So let's get to hand 1 here. Okay, hand 1, I've got king-queen in the big blind, and we've got a raise to 300 from Isildur on the button. And I went into this match with a 3-betting range that wasn't polarized at all. And what I mean by that is I was 3-betting with some pretty marginal hands, like king, queen, king, jack, ace 10, those types of hands. Feeling like at that point, it was very early on in sort of my heads up learning myself. So felt like the best approach. In the second match, I made some major adjustments to my 3-betting strategy. But here, I went ahead and 3-bet, and that's pretty standard, raise to 1,000. When the stacks are 100 big blinds deep, there's really no reason to go, more than that. If we had 20,000 in front of us, I might kick it up to 1,100, put a little more heat on him. So he calls. Now, this is a great flop. Comes king 4-4, unless he's got a 4 or ace king, which he's rarely going to have. You'd think that he's going to re-raise before the flop with a hand like that. Then I'm way in front. Having said that, he's pretty stubborn on flops when he calls a 3-bet, so I didn't see any reason to check it. I thought best way to play this was to build a pot and make a standard continuation bet, which in these spots, my standard C bet was 60% of pot, so that's 1,200, and that didn't change in match 2. You'll notice that. And here you see Isildur calling. Okay, now his calling range is very wide. If he has any ace, I think he's calling. I think he's also calling me with any king. Of course, if he's got a 4, he's calling me. But even hands like, pocket sevens, even a hand like queen 10, he could be calling a lot just to try to bluff me on the turn. He didn't fold a lot of flops when I c-bet, so I can't really give him... I'm never worried here about my hand being really the worst. I mean, of course he could have a 4, but it's very unlikely. He wasn't calling 3-bets all that light, so if he had a 4, it would have to be a pretty good 4, like a 4-5 suited or, maybe an ace 4 suited, something like that. The turn is a 10, which, it doesn't scare me at all. I felt like this was early in the match. I had sort of the wrong idea of how Isildur was going to play. From what people told me, and, you hear this idea, he's this crazy Swede, he gets it in bad, and he's nuts, and he's crazy. But as I found out after match 1, that really wasn't the case. It's not how he was playing me at all. So, anyway, I felt like throughout the match, I was probably going to continuation bet some flops and then check turn. And I didn't want to do that with hands where I missed, so that he could just call me on flops and then, bet turn and easy peasy pick up the pot. So I wanted to be a little bit tricky and check some of my stronger hands. Now, I'm not checking here out of fear at all. I'm checking to induce a bet. I really want Isildur to bet here because I want to get it in. So I check. Isildur checks behind. Now I'm 100% sure, basically, that I have the best hand. I don't think there's ever a time where he checks better than that on the turn. Like 0%, seriously. So based on that, this 6 shouldn't scare me one bit. I mean, there's really no hand with a 6 in it that is supposed to fear, I'm supposed to fear unless it's exactly pocket 6s. I mean, what are the odds of that, right? So I go ahead and make a value bet of 3,100. Pretty close to, 75% of the pot-ish. Leaving myself with 4,900. Fully hoping that he maybe makes a loose call with a 10. Also, maybe if he was checking back with a weaker king, he's going to call me with that hand. So I thought there's a few hands he might call with. He moved all in. So, again, I'm not that worried. At this point, I'm thinking, I feel like I definitely got him beat. But one hand, king 6, he could have that. But it just seems unlikely that he had king 6 suited. So I end up making the call. And as you can see, he did hit the 6. He made 6s fall in the river. So again, I guess I don't love the call in retrospect, but based on my impression of him, I thought he was capable of making a move like that. If this was later in the match, I would have felt like, wow, just a really weird spot for him to be bluffing. So he had to have something. It had to be a value play. And if he's value raising, he's never value raising with worse than king queen. So in hindsight, after I knew a little more, it's probably a fold. At the time, with the information I had, no chance I'm throwing that hand away there. Very early on in the session. All right, so he picks up a key hand early. Now he's going to raise to 300, and queen 9 is pretty borderline. I'm not going to 3-bet him with this hand, but it's good enough to see a flop with. So I decide to call. And I've got 10,000, so with a flop like 9 deuce 3 and 100 big blinds, there's 2 clubs on the board. My hand against, any range of hands that he's going to be able to get it in with, I think it's pretty decent. I think I might get it in sometimes against the worst 9, like Jack 9 suited, 9-10 suited. Or, there's tons of combo draws you could have. Ace 4, 4-5, of clubs, a deuce, like king deuce of clubs. There's like a million hands that I could be slightly ahead of. So anyway, I check. He bets 500. And the standard line in most situations is to just check call in this spot and play small ball poker, if you will. But again, I'm only 100 big blinds deep. Had I been 20,000 deep on a board like this, it's probably a mistake to get too frisky, because if he re-raises you with one of these hands, you can never like the situation on the turn because you'll always be guessing. But with 100 big blinds, I felt like I was strong enough that I can totally get it all in here and do okay against his range. So I make it 1,400, pretty small check raise, which is what I was doing against him in the first match. Again, another adjustment I made for match 2 was making my check raise on the flop a little bit bigger. And he just min re-raises me, kind of, which he'll do that with a lot of hands. I mean, he actually did that to me a decent amount, so it doesn't necessarily scream to me that he has a set. With a board as draw heavy as this, there's a lot of draws, like I mentioned, that he could have, and like worse 9s and whatnot. And if he does have 10s or jacks or better, I mean, I still have 5 outs against that hand. So I just stick it all in, figuring he's got a draw. If he calls, he calls. Oh, and he has me out kicked. So that turn and river does it for me. Seems like a little bit of a cooler hand to me anyway, but obviously just a pair of 9s doesn't seem all that strong. But in this situation, with the board as kind of draw heavy as it was, and me check raising, like he could easily put me on a draw, right? If he puts me on a draw check raising, he's going to ship it with any 9, I think. A lot of the time, he's going to call me anyway. If he's re-raising me on the flop, he's not folding a 9 ever. All right. Once again, I've got queen 9. This time I have a little bit of a better hand. I have queens and 9s top 2. He bets. I go ahead and raise, which I'd been doing not too often, maybe about 15 to 20% of the time. A very draw-heavy board. I'm really hoping to get it in here. So I check raise, and he calls. He just calls me. So turn is an 8, and that really only fills one hand, and that's the 10 jack. But as you can notice, there's 2 spades out there and 2 hearts out there. So there's a lot of, if we get in on the turn, there's a lot of draw hands he could have that he thinks is good. He could have something like queen 10 of hearts. And if he does, he's got top pair and a flush draw. He could even have, 8, 10 of spades. There's just a million hands that I'm still way ahead of. So I'm not going to come off the lead here. I'm at 2,700 into 34. Pretty decent size. He moves in. And heads up situation. You just can never, ever, ever, ever fold here. You just have to absolutely call, especially with a draw-heavy board like this. So I decide to make the call and see the bad news. Yeah, he had a straight. Board pair is not mine.